Hey everybody, it's Miss Lux, and I want to talk about your introduction paragraphs and what you can do to make them hot. So HOT stands for hook, orientation, and thesis. The hook is the first part of the paragraph. It's a general statement on the overall topic of the essay. The orientation is a sentence or two that introduces and connects the text and the author to the hook. And the thesis, of course, defines the argument and ideally the supporting evidence as well. Think of it as an inverted triangle where you begin with very general idea, and as you move through the paragraph, you move through the most specific sentence, which is, of course, the thesis. Okay, I'm going to do an example for you guys using one of the questions I think was most popular during discussion 1, which is, what's the main reason for the dissolution of the marriage between Leroy and Norma Jean? So for my hook, and this is really an oversimplified example, I'm just going to do one sentence for each of these. It would suffice as an introduction paragraph, but I would probably flesh it out a little bit before my final draft. So for the hook, it can really be something as simple as these days, most marriages end in divorce, something like that. You could even use this like a statistic, but then you would have to introduce and reference that source that you got it from. There's no harm in that, but you can just say something really simple, very general statement. Most marriages end in divorce. Now I have to have a statement that introduces my text, the author, and that connects this hook here to those items. So I could say, in Bobby Ann Mason's Shiloh, Leroy and Norma Jean are heading toward becoming another divorce statistic. Okay, so I've introduced my title, my author, and I've connected sort of the idea from my hook to that story that I'll be discussing in my essay. And now my thesis has to be the most specific sentence in the paragraph. So I would say, a lack of communication is to blame for their marriage woes. I sort of hate that, but I would work on it. Semicolon. Or I could make it a completely separate sentence because I would like to define the support I'm going to use to support my argument. My argument being that a lack of communication is the problem. So I want to define my support. This causes them to look elsewhere for happiness, hide the pain caused by Randy's death, and grow apart instead of together. Okay, so this would be what I would talk about my 3 body paragraphs. So my first body paragraph, I would show how a lack of communication causes them to look elsewhere for happiness. So for Norma Jean, you know, her working out and her schoolwork, and for Leroy, you know, smoking pot and riding around. Then I would want to show how a lack of communication causes them to hide their pain and kind of what that does to them internally, and then how a lack of communication causes them to grow apart instead of together. So she's moving upward and onward, and he's sort of focused on this log cabin idea. It would be difficult not to sort of overlap my evidence, but in each paragraph, I want to make sure that I'm focused very heavily on my argument, which is that a lack of communication is the problem, and then I have to connect it to each piece of evidence to show there is a lack of communication. But in general, I have my hook, my very general statement on the topic of the essay. It's not about the text yet, but it's about the overall idea, and then my orientation, which introduces the title, the author that's required, and then connects it to the statement that I've made in the hook. And then my thesis, which is the most specific you're going to get, gives my argument and ideally my 3 pieces of evidence that are going to support that. For the conclusion, you actually do the opposite. You begin with a restatement of the thesis, and then you sort of pull backwards from there, moving to the more general. So you begin specific in the conclusion, and you move out to a more general statement there. Thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to make your introductions hot and to email me with any questions. Have a great one.